Have you ever loved someone so deeply and yet felt like every step closer pushed them further away? You give them your heart and they retreat into silence. You offer warmth and they grow cold. You begin to question yourself. Was I too much? Not enough? No, you were simply trying to hold a soul that was never taught how to be held. And here's the truth. Some people don't run from love because they don't feel it. They run because it feels too real. Now listen closely. The person who runs from love is not running from you. They are running from a version of themselves they no longer recognize in your presence. You become a mirror. And what they see, vulnerability, hope, surrender, scares them. But here's where your power begins, not in chasing, fixing, or convincing, but in being. When you stop trying to control the outcome and start embodying the frequency of grounded, unconditional love, you speak a language their soul remembers but their mind forgot. You become the calm in the storm of their panic. Not loud, not forceful, but steady, safe. Understand this. The avoidant mind mistrusts closeness because closeness once meant pain. But the soul remembers a different truth. The soul doesn't want escape, it wants resonance. So how do you leave an imprint on someone who runs? You don't chase them, you understand them. You don't fight their walls, you honor them. You become so deeply rooted in your own peace that your presence speaks louder than your words ever could. You meet them in the space where no performance exists. No masks, no fixing, just energy, just truth. They may not be able to hold your love now, but they will never forget the way it held them. And someday, when their soul outgrows their fear, they'll search for the frequency that once made them feel safe in silence. That frequency is you. You leave your mark not by grabbing tighter, but by letting go with love. Because real love doesn't demand to stay. Real love knows it already left an imprint deep enough to echo through time. And when they finally stop running, what they'll remember most is the one soul who didn't force the door open but quietly left the light on. Love without chains is not just a concept, it's a spiritual practice. When someone has an avoidant attachment style, the core of their struggle isn't the absence of love, it's the fear of being consumed by it. Deep down, avoidants are not heartless or detached. They're overwhelmed by what love awakens inside them. Love, to them, often feels like a threat to their independence, to their self-regulation, to their emotional safety. They've been wired, often from early experiences, to equate closeness with a loss of identity or emotional danger. So when you try to love them the way you might want to be loved, with closeness, intensity, and consistent emotional availability, it can feel like pressure, like being trapped. It's not your fault. And it's not theirs either. It's programming. But the solution doesn't lie in loving louder, it lies in loving freer. To leave a soul imprint on someone who runs from love, you must become the opposite of what triggers them. You must become space. A space that doesn't demand, doesn't control, doesn't chase, but still radiates presence and care. That kind of love confuses the avoidant at first. They expect entanglement. They expect strings attached. They expect the closeness to come with rules, expectations, and emotional debts. But when you offer connection without pressure, when your love comes with no price tag, it begins to feel like a warm breeze instead of a tidal wave. This doesn't mean detaching emotionally. It means becoming intentional with your presence. You can still be deeply connected, but not possessive. You can still care, but not cling. The more you embody this kind of love, the love that holds, but never cages, the more you disrupt the internal narrative the avoidant has about relationships. Suddenly, being close doesn't feel like losing oneself. It feels like being seen without being controlled. It feels like breathing. And the imprint you leave is not in what you do for them, it's in what you don't do. You don't chase, you don't beg, you don't explode when they withdraw. You stand rooted in your own worth, loving them with the kind of strength they've never encountered before. A strength that says, I love you, but I don't need to own you to feel whole. That is the kind of love that echoes long after you've stopped speaking, long after they've walked away. When love feels like freedom, not captivity, it begins to crack open the wall, slowly, quietly, but undeniably. Your love, without chains, becomes a blueprint their soul returns to, even if their mind can't understand it yet. That is how you leave a soul imprint. Not by clinging tighter, but by becoming the one who loved without needing to hold on. For someone with an avoidant attachment style, safety isn't found in closeness, it's found in space. That's why what you experience as intimacy might feel like intrusion to them. The very things that feel warm and connecting to you, extended eye contact, vulnerable conversations, emotional openness, can feel like pressure to them. Not because they don't crave connection, but because connection has been historically linked to discomfort, disappointment, or even emotional danger in their nervous system. The avoidant learns early on that being close to others often comes at a cost. Maybe they had a caregiver who was unpredictable, overwhelming, or emotionally demanding. Maybe they were taught that emotions should be managed alone. Either way, closeness triggers alarm bells, not warmth. The truth is, the avoidant doesn't want to be alone. They want to feel safe enough not to run. But safety doesn't come from you proving your love or constantly trying to reassure them. In fact, the more you try to convince them of your value, the more they might feel trapped or obligated. What they need isn't a louder declaration of love. They need a calmer one, a steadier one. They need a presence that says, I see you, I respect your pace, I'm here to understand you. I'm here to understand you. Your emotional consistency becomes the medicine. Not dramatic gestures, not grand confessions, but simply showing up without pressure, without emotional spikes, and without taking their distancing personally. That's how you become the safety net they never had. When they pull away, you don't react with panic. You hold your center. When they need space, you don't flood them with texts or guilt. You give them room to breathe and trust that your energy will remain present even in physical absence. This doesn't mean you have to ignore your needs or become emotionally numb. It means you regulate yourself first so you can co-regulate with them. You offer emotional safety by becoming emotionally safe. That means grounded, stable, and not seeking constant emotional validation. The more you model this kind of inner stability, the more their nervous system begins to relax around you. Their subconscious starts to associate connection with peace, not panic. Over time, this creates a new internal pattern for the avoidant. They start to realize that intimacy doesn't always lead to engulfment, that love doesn't always come with conditions or hidden expectations. And the only reason that shift happens is because you became the first person who didn't treat their distance like a personal attack. You responded with compassion instead of control. That kind of response is rare. That kind of emotional tone leaves a permanent mark. When you become the emotional environment they never had but always needed, you give them a glimpse of something they didn't think existed. Connection without chaos. That is the beginning of transformation. Avoidants live in a world where words often fail, not because they don't understand language, but because language can feel like a trap. Conversations about emotions, especially when charged with intensity or expectation, activate defense mechanisms they don't even know they're using. When you try to connect through emotional discussion, they might shut down, minimize, or intellectualize their feelings. It's not because they don't care. It's because their system was wired to believe that vulnerability equals danger. And so the more you push for clarity or depth through words, the more they retreat into silence, not to hurt you, but to survive the overwhelming wave of emotion that language brings. But there is a deeper form of communication, one that bypasses the brain and goes straight to the soul. That language is presence, energy, silence. True connection with an avoidant doesn't happen through confrontation. It happens through calm, through stillness. When you sit with them in silence, without pushing, without analyzing, without forcing them to articulate what they cannot yet name, something sacred occurs. They feel seen without being exposed. They feel felt without being pressed. Your ability to hold emotional space becomes more powerful than any words you could ever speak. When your energy says, I accept you as you are, even in your silence, you build trust on a primal level. You stop being the source of pressure and start being the source of peace. Avoidants don't trust words, they trust patterns, consistency, tone, presence. They're listening to your energy long before they hear your voice. They're watching your reaction when they go quiet. Do you panic? Do you guilt trip? Or do you stay grounded, open, and non-reactive? That moment where you offer connection without demanding it in return is the moment their soul begins to soften. Maybe not visibly, maybe not immediately, but the imprint is there. It lingers. You become a safe memory, a reference point, a feeling they return to long after the conversation ends. It's not your explanation that reaches them, it's your vibration. In silence, you say, I am here. In silence, you say, I don't need you to be anything other than what you are. In silence, you say, you're safe. even in your discomfort. That is a revolutionary message for the avoidant, one they've likely never received. And because silence doesn't require performance, they can exist without armor. For many, that may be the first time in their life that connection didn't require effort, justification, or self-betrayal. So when you sit with them in stillness, when you match their need for quiet, not with withdrawal, but with presence, you create a bond that words could never manufacture. You speak directly to the place inside them that's tired of being misunderstood. And even if they never say it aloud, they'll remember you not as the person who said all the right things, but as the person who didn't need to say anything at all. The avoidant doesn't simply show up in a relationship as who they are. They show up as who they were trained to be. Their behavior is not random. It's patterned. It's rehearsed. Deep beneath their cool exterior or emotional withdrawal lies a child who learned early that closeness was either conditional, overwhelming, or absent altogether. They're not responding to you. They're reacting to an emotional script written years before you even existed in their life. Every time you move toward them emotionally, they respond based on this internal template, often without realizing it. This is what makes loving and avoidance so confusing. It feels personal, but it isn't. It's procedural. It's a play they're stuck inside. The way you interrupt that script isn't through confrontation or emotional intensity. It's by becoming the character they never had, but always needed. You become the calm in the chaos. You don't force new scenes. You rewrite the story by showing up differently than what their nervous system expects. If they expect rejection when they open up, you offer acceptance. If they expect pressure when they need space, you offer patience. If they expect drama when they withdraw, you offer peace. This isn't about performing or pretending. It's about becoming a grounded, conscious presence that disrupts their loop of fear. Imagine you're sitting with someone who flinches every time you lift your hand. Not because you've hurt them, but because someone else did. What they need from you isn't explanation, it's consistency. Over and over, they need to see that your presence is not dangerous, that their need for distance won't be punished, that their silence won't be interpreted as rejection. This takes time, and it takes more inner work than outer strategy. You don't need to convince them with words that you're safe. You need to embody safety so consistently that their nervous system slowly starts to recalibrate in your presence. They begin to feel, maybe for the first time, that closeness doesn't have to cost them their autonomy, that intimacy doesn't mean engulfment, that emotional connection doesn't lead to chaos. Your ability to respond instead of react, to listen instead of lecture, becomes the healing element. And over time, this gentle repetition begins to crack the emotional code they've lived by. They start to notice that you don't punish them for being human, that you don't shame them for needing space or for being slow to open up, that your love doesn't disappear when they struggle. And little by little, they begin to test new behavior, a little more vulnerability, a little more reach, a little less retreat, not because you ask, but because you proved it was safe. You're not here to rescue or repair them. You're here to show what love looks like when it's patient, grounded, and steady. You rewrite the ending of their old story not by tearing it apart, but by offering a new chapter so compelling, their soul wants to stay and read it. You cannot strategize your way into someone's heart, especially not someone with an avoidant attachment style. When you approach love like a game to be won, a puzzle to be solved, or a challenge to conquer, you're operating from your ego, not your soul. And the avoidant, who is hypersensitive to emotional agendas and pressure, will sense that immediately. They may not know what you're doing consciously, but energetically, they feel it. They feel the push. They feel the unspoken need behind your kind words. They feel the subtle urgency, and it activates their internal alarm, not because they don't want love, but because what they're being offered doesn't feel clean. It doesn't feel peaceful. It feels like a setup. That's why your greatest impact isn't made through cleverness or effort. It's made through authenticity. When you strip away the tactics, the overanalysis, the emotional management, and simply be the energy of love instead of trying to do loving things, you shift the entire dynamic. You stop being another person trying to fix them or earn their closeness. You become a mirror, and that mirror reflects something their soul has always longed for, peace. Avoidants are not immune to love. They are overwhelmed by the expectations that usually come with it. They don't want to be changed, improved, or saved. What they crave, though they may not admit it, is a presence so whole, so grounded, so accepting that it gives them permission to soften. But that permission can only be granted through energy, through the way you hold yourself, through the way you love, without condition, without agenda, without the need for immediate return. Being that mirror means you must first become what you hope to awaken in them. If you want them to be vulnerable, you must be safe. If you want them to stop running, you must stop chasing. If you want to be remembered, you must be present, not performative. The soul imprint you leave is not created by what you try to force, but by the peace you carry that challenges their belief that love is always chaotic. Imagine being the first person in their life who loved them without needing to change them, who didn't flinch when they retreated, who didn't guilt them into closeness, who radiated such profound self-trust and inner stillness that just being around you felt healing. That's the power of soul over strategy, because strategy manipulates. Soul transforms. And transformation doesn't happen through persuasion, it happens through resonance. When your energy becomes a safe and loving frequency, it starts to tune the emotional static inside them. Even if they don't respond immediately, even if they continue to run, they will never forget how it felt to be around someone who didn't demand a version of them they weren't ready to become. That's how you leave a lasting mark, by being the one who loved from the soul, not the ego, the one who didn't need to win, but simply chose to be. There is a moment in every deep connection when you realize the greatest act of love is not holding on, it's letting go. But not with resentment, not with bitterness, with grace, with presence, with truth. And this becomes even more profound when loving someone with an avoidant attachment style. Because the paradox is this: they may not fully recognize or appreciate your love while you are offering it consistently. They are too busy managing their fear of being consumed, too entangled in their own self-protection to feel the depth of what you're giving. But once your energy is no longer chasing them, once your voice no longer calls out in expectation, something begins to shift. And that shift is where your soul imprint begins to echo. Avoidants often process love in hindsight. While the anxious heart feels everything in the moment, the avoidant heart feels things in silence. After space, after time, after you've let go. And when you do it with dignity, when you don't collapse or rage or shame them for their fear, you leave something sacred behind, a memory, a vibration, a feeling that lingers long after your physical presence is gone. That feeling becomes a seed planted deep in the soil of their subconscious. It may take weeks, months, even years to bloom, but it's there, and they will return to it, especially when life reminds them of what they lost by running. What leaves the deepest mark is not desperation, but peace. The person who walks away with love still in their eyes, who doesn't need closure or conflict to feel whole, becomes unforgettable. You are not a chapter they can skim through and forget. You become the line they keep rereading. Not because you tried harder, but because you let go in a way that was free of blame. You walked away not to punish them, but to honor yourself. That kind of strength, that kind of clarity is rare, and rare is remembered. When you let go, you show them what they couldn't see before, that your love was never about possession, it was about presence, that you weren't holding on to control them, but to walk with them. And when they couldn't receive that, you didn't collapse, you released them with love. That's where your power lives, not in being irreplaceable through drama, but in being irreplaceable through peace. Some imprints are made by intensity, but the soul imprints are made by grace. By the way you stood still when everything inside you wanted to chase. By the way you held their soul gently even as their fear pushed you away. By the way you disappeared with dignity, not destruction. That kind of love is not easily forgotten. It becomes the standard, the benchmark, the haunting beauty they compare all future connections to. You don't leave a mark by staying longer. You leave a mark by loving so purely that even your absence still feels like a gift. And when their fear fades and the silence settles, what will echo most is the quiet power of the one who walked away without ever closing their heart. When loving someone with an avoidant heart, it's easy to get caught in the spiral of overgiving, over-explaining, and overextending yourself just to maintain the connection. But here's the truth. What lingers in their memory after you're gone isn't how much you chased, but how deeply you respected yourself, even while loving them. Self-respect isn't about putting up walls. It's about holding sacred boundaries that reflect your own worth, even in the presence of someone who struggles to see it clearly. The avoidant doesn't forget the one who demanded nothing but honored everything. They remember the person who didn't lower their standards to stay close, but instead stood in their own light and invited them in. You weren't a doormat, and you weren't distant. You were grounded, and that balance becomes unforgettable. It teaches them something they didn't know love could be. Strong, but soft. Warm, but wise. Present, but never compromising your soul. When you held your boundary without aggression, when you didn't collapse to earn their affection, you became the mirror that reflected their emotional maturity or lack of it. And though they may not acknowledge it at the time, something within them knows they encountered a